It was the coldest night of winter when Caleb Thorne found 3 children huddled at his gate, their small bodies soaked to the bone and their faces streaked with dirt and fear. The wind howled through the empty fields around his ranch, biting at his skin as he stepped out into the dark, lantern in hand. The storm had come without warning, and by the time Caleb heard the cries, the sky had turned an angry shade of black, the storm tearing across his property with a ferocity he hadn't seen in years. Caleb hadn't spoken to another human being in 6 months. His ranch sat 15 miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but rolling hills and the kind of silence that made a man forget his own voice. He preferred it that way. People meant complications. People meant pain. His past was full of loss he had buried deep inside, just as he buried the memories of his wife and son. People came and went, but grief stayed. The children's cries reached him through the storm, cutting through the wind and rain like a beacon in the night. Caleb moved toward the front gate, the mud sucking at his boots as he walked. Each step was a reminder that his isolation was about to be shattered. When he reached the gate, the sight before him made his heart stutter. There, huddled against the wooden fence, were 3 small figures. The oldest girl, no older than 8, was clutching 2 younger children to her chest, both of them shivering violently. The girl's dress was torn, muddy from the wet ground. The boy beside her couldn't have been more than 6, his lips turning blue from the cold. But it was the smallest one, a tiny girl with matted blonde hair that made Caleb's blood run cold. She wasn't moving at all. For a long moment, Caleb stood frozen, lantern shaking in his hand. The walls he had built around his heart over the years began to crack. These children, these helpless little souls, represented everything he had lost. The family he'd never be again. The father he'd never get the chance to be. The oldest girl looked up at him, her eyes wide with desperation. She didn't speak, but her expression said it all. "Help us." Thunder cracked overhead, and Caleb felt something inside him shift. This was no longer about keeping his distance, about maintaining his solitude. He couldn't leave them out here. Not in this storm. Not with the smallest one lying still, her life hanging in the balance. Without a second thought, Caleb opened the gate and knelt down in front of them. The girl pulled the younger children closer, instinctively protecting them, even from Caleb, their potential rescuer. Caleb couldn't help but respect the girl's bravery. She'd learned early not to trust adults. But as Caleb reached for the unconscious little girl, he had no idea that in just 48 hours, this same child would look him in the eyes and say one word, that would change everything he thought he knew about family, loss, and what it meant to be a father. Inside his cabin, Caleb laid the unconscious girl on the couch while the other 2 children stood by the fireplace, dripping water onto his wooden floors. The oldest girl never took her eyes off him, ready to grab her siblings and run if he made one wrong move. Caleb could see the protective instinct in her, the burden of caring for these children far too young. It was the same burden he used to carry, but that was before the death of his own family. The little girl, Lily, couldn't be more than 4 years old. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. Caleb wrapped her in every blanket he could find, but her body remained cold to the touch, a sign of hypothermia. She needed medical attention. The nearest hospital was an hour away, and the storm made it nearly impossible to reach. The boy, Sam, spoke first, his voice barely a whisper. "Is Lily going to die?" Caleb looked at the boy, his eyes dark with sorrow that no child should know. Caleb's own heart ached as he tried to hold on to his composure. His life had been spent alone, keeping everyone at a distance. But these kids had no one else, no one to protect them. "What's your name?" Caleb asked softly. "Sam," the boy replied, glancing at the older girl, Emma, for permission to speak. Caleb smiled gently. "I'm Caleb." Emma stepped forward, chin raised despite her chattering teeth. "We don't need your help for long, just until the storm passes. There was pride in her voice, the kind of pride that came from being forced to grow up far too fast. Caleb recognized it. He'd worn that same armor once before, a lifetime ago. Life had taught him that pride was just another word for loneliness. He handed Emma a dry shirt and pointed toward his bedroom. "Get out of those wet clothes, both of you." When Emma hesitated, Caleb added, "I'll stay here with your sister." While they changed, Caleb studied the unconscious girl, Lily. Her skin was still icy to the touch, but color was slowly returning to her cheeks. Caleb found himself smoothing her hair back from her forehead, the way he used to do with his own son, Michael, before. He stopped himself. That life was over, dead and buried, along with his wife, Sarah. Emma returned, wearing Caleb's oversized shirt like a dress. Sam was swimming in one of Caleb's old sweaters. They sat on either side of Lily, forming a protective circle that Caleb wasn't a part of. "Where are your parents?" Caleb asked. Emma's jaw tightened, and her eyes darkened. "Gone." "Gone?" Caleb asked, his voice soft. "Where? Just gone?" Her voice carried a finality that Caleb recognized all too well. "Gone," she repeated, her tone leaving no room for further questioning. But Caleb had spent enough years alone to recognize the sound of abandonment. These children hadn't lost their parents in an accident. No, they had been left behind, cast aside like forgotten toys. His heart clenched at the thought. These children, Caleb thought to himself, had been thrown away. The storm outside rattled the windows and made the walls creak as if the world itself was trying to tear them apart. Lily stirred on the couch, her eyes fluttering open. She looked around, confused, and then focused on Caleb with the clearest blue eyes he'd ever seen. "Are you the man who's going to take care of us?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. The question hit Caleb like a physical blow. He hadn't been a father in so long, and hearing those words, those simple, innocent words, shattered the walls he had built around his heart. Emma quickly pulled Lily closer. "Don't say things like that, Lily. We take care of ourselves." But the damage was done. Caleb stared at this tiny girl, who spoke of being taken care of like it was some distant fairy tale, and felt something dangerous stir in his chest, something that felt suspiciously like hope. And that's when he heard it. The sound that would change everything. Vehicles approaching through the storm, their headlights cutting through the darkness, heading straight for his gate. Caleb moved to the window and peered through the rain-streaked glass. 2 sheriff's vehicles were pulling up to his gate, their red and blue lights painting the storm in harsh colors. Behind him, Emma grabbed Sam and Lily, pulling them toward the back of the cabin. "We have to go," she whispered urgently. "They found us." Caleb turned around, his heart racing. The terror in Emma's eyes was real, primal. These children weren't just abandoned. They were running from something, or someone. The pounding on the door grew louder, more insistent. Caleb's mind raced as he turned away from the window. Emma's eyes were wide with fear, her small body trembling as she held Lily in her arms. Sam, too, had his face pressed against the window, trying to see who was coming. Caleb moved toward them, his heart pounding with the weight of the decision he knew he had to make. "Get in the bedroom," he ordered softly, his voice steady despite the storm raging inside him. "Now, all 3 of you, get under the bed and don't make a sound, no matter what happens." Emma nodded quickly, her protective instincts taking over as she grabbed Sam and helped him under the bed with Lily. Caleb didn't waste another second. He turned back toward the front door, his hand instinctively resting on the handle of his Colt. He hadn't been a man who enjoyed confrontation in years, but these children, they were his responsibility now. Outside, the rain continued to pour, and the wind howled like a pack of wolves, but nothing was louder than the pounding on his door. The storm seemed to have no mercy, and neither did the people outside. He opened the door slowly, the cold air biting at his skin as he stepped into the night. There, standing on his porch, was Sheriff Morris, his wet hat dripping with rainwater. Behind him, Deputy Hayes held a flashlight in one hand and a clipboard in the other. Caleb could feel the weight of their eyes on him, and for a brief moment he thought he might crack under the pressure. But he couldn't. Not now. "Evening, Caleb," Sheriff Morris greeted, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Sorry to bother you so late, but we're looking for 3 children. Got a report they might be in this area?" Caleb kept his expression neutral. "Haven't seen any children. Been alone all day." Sheriff Morris stepped closer, his eyes scanning Caleb's face. He seemed to be studying him carefully, looking for something that Caleb didn't want him to see. "Mind if we take a look around?" Morris asked, his voice casual but his eyes sharp. "Just to be thorough." "Yes, I mind," Caleb said, his tone firm as he blocked the doorway with his body. He couldn't let them inside, not yet, not with the children hiding in the back. The deputy stepped forward, trying to peer around Caleb's shoulder. "These children are in danger, Thorne," he said, his voice growing more serious. "They've been missing for 3 days. Their foster father is worried sick." Caleb's stomach twisted. Foster father. Emma's terrified face suddenly made perfect sense. The fear in her eyes wasn't just because they had run away, it was because they were running from someone much worse. The sheriff studied Caleb for a moment longer. "You sure you haven't seen anything? 3 kids, girl about 8, boy about 6, little blonde girl maybe 4 years old?" The description was too perfect, too specific. Caleb felt his heart rate quicken, his mind racing. Had they been watching him? Had Garrison or someone else seen the children here? "I told you I haven't seen anyone," Caleb said, his voice strained, though he fought to keep it calm. "Been alone all day." Sheriff Morris nodded slowly, his eyes narrowing as he glanced behind Caleb toward the cabin. "Well, if you do see them, you call us immediately for their own safety." He handed Caleb a business card, and Caleb took it without a word. The sheriff and the deputy turned to leave, but not before Morris paused and added, "These children need proper care, Caleb. Professional care." As the sheriff and his men walked away, Caleb's thoughts spun. The reality of the situation began to settle in. The children were running from their foster father, Harold Brennan, and the fear in their eyes wasn't just the fear of being caught. It was the fear of what he might do if he got them back. He had to protect them. But from what? And how far was he willing to go? Inside the cabin, the storm continued to howl outside, but the children were quiet now, still hiding beneath the bed. Caleb's hand gripped the gun in his holster as he walked back to the living room, his mind racing with possibilities. The children's story was unraveling in his mind like a thread, each piece revealing more about their past, their pain, and the man who had tried to erase their existence. He sat down at the table, staring at the business card in his hand. Sheriff Morris had said he was doing the right thing, but Caleb didn't trust the system. He had learned that the hard way. In this town, the system worked for the powerful and the rich, people like Harold Brennan and Marcus Garrison. They had the resources to make everything disappear, but Caleb knew something the sheriff didn't. He knew the children weren't just in danger from a broken system. They were in danger from someone far more dangerous, a man who had already proven he would do anything to get what he wanted. And if he found the children here, there was no telling what he might do. Caleb's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of small footsteps. Emma emerged from the hallway, her face pale but determined. She walked slowly toward him, her eyes filled with something he hadn't seen in a long time. Fear, yes, but also courage. It was the same courage that had kept her going through the worst of things, the same courage she had used to protect her younger siblings. "Papa?" she said quietly, her voice strong despite the fear in her eyes. "Thank you." Caleb's heart twisted. "You don't have to thank me, Emma," he said, standing up and walking over to her. "You're safe here. As long as I'm alive, I'll make sure you stay safe." She nodded, but there was something in her eyes, something that told Caleb this wasn't over. They weren't just running from Harold Brennan. They were running from a nightmare that Caleb didn't fully understand, and the storm wasn't the only danger they had to fear. "I don't want to go back to him, Papa," Emma whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. "I won't let him take us back." Caleb's heart ached as he looked at her, her small hands trembling with fear. He had promised to protect her, to protect them all. But now, standing in the face of real danger, he had to make a choice. And that choice would determine everything.